You ever notice how some summers carry a hum beneath the heat, not just the buzz of cicadas or the drone of lawnmowers? I mean something deeper, a kind of electricity that makes the air feel alive, like the whole world's holding its breath. That's what the summer of 1969 felt like. Everything was teetering between chaos and wonder. You'd turn on the television and see the world on fire. Protests, marches, Vietnam. Then you'd flip the channel and there it was, a rocket taller than a 30-story building gleaming under the Florida sun. And somehow, both of those realities existed in the same breath. I was 24 that year, working part-time at a gas station by day and dreaming too big by night. Rent was $80, gas was 35 cents, and if you had $1, you could fill your stomach and your soul with a jukebox song. I lived in a small town outside Pittsburgh, a place where nothing much ever happened, except now the world's biggest event was being beamed straight into our living rooms. Man's going to the moon, my dad said one evening, shaking his head like it was both the dumbest and most magnificent thing he'd ever heard. He was a World War II vet, all practicality and quiet steel, the kind of man who fixed what was broken, didn't talk much, and looked at the stars only when the lights went out. "Can you believe it?" I said, trying to sound casual. He took a long drag on his cigarette and said, "Son, I'll believe it when I see footprints." That was Dad, never impressed by promises, only proof. Mom, on the other hand, had a soft spot for big dreams. She'd lean against the kitchen counter, listening to the radio as Walter Cronkite talked about fuel tests and launch windows. "You watch," she'd say. "Those boys are going to make history." We didn't have much, but we had a TV, a bulky Zenith with wood paneling and rabbit ears that needed constant adjusting. It was our window to everything beyond our front yard. I remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet one night, watching footage of the astronauts in their white suits training underwater, floating in slow motion. "They look like angels," my little sister said. And she wasn't wrong. Something about it felt pure, the idea that 3 men were preparing to leave everything behind, trading their names and faces for the chance to stand where no one ever had. As the launch date crept closer, you could feel the country tightening like a drum. Gas stations played NASA updates over the radio. Kids carried homemade cardboard rockets. Even the old-timers at the diner stopped arguing about politics long enough to admit it was kind of incredible. That last week before launch, every front porch on our street seemed to have its own space program. Men arguing about fuel ratios. Women speculating about whether they'd find God up there. I remember walking home from work one night, grease on my hands, the air heavy with July heat. I stopped and looked up. The moon hung low and perfect, like a coin tossed into the sky. It had always been there, watching, patient, untouchable. But that night, it felt closer, like it knew we were coming, somewhere down in Florida. 3 men were lying in their bunks trying to sleep, knowing they were about to gamble everything. Neil Armstrong, calm as the surface he'd soon step on. Buzz Aldrin, fiery and fierce like he could will the engines to light. Michael Collins, the quiet watcher, the man who'd orbit alone while the world watched the other 2 touch eternity. I went inside, turned off the lights, and let the radio hum quietly in the dark. They said the launch was set for July 16th, and I swear even the crickets sounded nervous that night. It was July 16th, 1969. The morning smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and destiny. You know those moments in life when everyone around you seems to be watching the same thing, holding their breath at the same time? That was one of them. The world hadn't been that united since the Beatles played Ed Sullivan. The whole country woke up early that day, even folks who usually needed dynamite to get out of bed before noon. My dad was already in his armchair, tie on, hair slicked back like he was the one getting in the rocket. "Can't watch history in your undershirt," he said, which made absolutely no sense, but that's how he operated. Mom was making pancakes, the good kind, with blueberries, pretending not to care but glancing at the clock every other second. My little sister was parked on the carpet in front of the TV, still in her pajamas, whispering, "Go, Rocket, go," under her breath like a secret prayer. And me? I was trying to act cool, like it was just another Wednesday, but my hands were sweating and my heart was drumming faster than that countdown clock. We had neighbors over, the Jenkinses from next door, Mr. Patterson, who had somehow forgiven Dad for borrowing his ladder and never returning it, and Mrs. Callahan, who brought a Jell-O mold because apparently even space exploration required snacks. The living room was packed tighter than a capsule crew. Someone had the bright idea to turn off the fans so we can hear better. which meant by the time NASA hit T-minus 3 minutes, we were marinating in the combined humidity of 8 people and 1 cat. On the screen, Cape Kennedy shimmered in the heat haze. The rocket looked impossibly tall, like something out of a dream, white and gleaming against the morning sky. Then came that voice, calm, steady, like a man reciting poetry in Morse code. 10, 9, 8. Dad's cigarette burned down to his fingers. Mom stopped flipping pancakes midair. The whole house went silent except for the television. 3, 2, 1, lift off. And then thunder. Even through that tiny TV speaker, you could feel it in your chest. That sound wasn't just power, it was purpose. The Saturn V didn't so much take off as it decided gravity was optional. Flames roared out, brighter than daylight, and the camera panned up as the rocket climbed higher and higher. For a second, it seemed to hover, as if it, too, couldn't believe what it was doing. Then it kept rising, slow at first, then faster, a column of fire pushing against everything that said, "You can't." Dad whispered, "She's going." No one corrected him for calling a rocket she. It felt right. When that tower of flame cleared the launch pad, the whole room exhaled. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I nearly passed out. The TV showed the crowd at Cape Kennedy, thousands of people shielding their eyes, mouths open, some crying, some clapping. A woman in a polka dot dress looked like she was praying. Even old Walter Cronkite, who'd covered wars and assassinations with a face carved from stone, couldn't hide his grin. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said softly, "Boy, oh boy." It felt like that, boy, oh boy. That's all you could say. The rocket kept shrinking on the screen until it was just a dot, a white speck trailing smoke into forever. And for once, the noise in our house stopped. No bickering, no chores, no complaints about the TV reception. Just silence, the good kind. When the first stage detached, Mom actually clapped. She'd never clapped for a machine before. She looked embarrassed afterward, but I think she was proud. Proud to be alive in a time when humanity had decided to aim a little higher. For the next few days, the world existed in orbit. You couldn't walk into a diner, a barber shop, or a bus stop without hearing about the mission. It was like the Super Bowl, Christmas, and Judgment Day rolled into one. Kids drew rockets in chalk on sidewalks. Teachers postponed tests. Churches held special prayers. I even saw a sign outside the corner store that said, "Moon or bust, half off cigarettes till they land." We stayed glued to that TV, every hour bringing some new transmission. The astronauts' voices, calm, methodical, and just human enough to make you realize what they were risking, became part of the house soundtrack. Roger that, Houston. Trajectory nominal, and it was like poetry and engineering. I'd come home from work at the gas station, covered in oil and dust, just in time to watch the nightly updates. Dad would already be there, cigarette glowing in the dark, watching those tiny white suits floating in blackness. "You think they're scared?" I asked him once. He didn't take his eyes off the screen. "If they aren't, they're not human." Then after a pause, he added, "But if they are, and they're still doing it, that's courage." He didn't say things like that often. It landed heavier than any speech. By the third day, something strange happened. The constant news of war, protests, and assassinations seemed to fade. Not gone, but softened, like background static. For once, the world had something else to talk about, something good. When Walter Cronkite said, "They are approaching lunar orbit," even my cynical Uncle Ralph came over just to watch. He brought his flask and muttered, "They'd better not screw it up." But I could tell he was nervous too. Everyone was. The idea of men leaving Earth and circling the moon, it didn't feel real. It felt biblical, like we'd stepped off the edge of the map and were waiting to see if dragons or angels lived there. Mom made popcorn that night. The living room glowed with that TV light, and I remember looking around at everyone, family, neighbors, friends, and then thinking how strange it was that for once no one was talking over each other. We were all just watching. It wasn't entertainment. It was communion. When the broadcast cut to a wide shot of the moon, silent and pale against the black, Dad leaned forward and whispered, "That's not the moon, that's a place now." I didn't get it then, but I do now. You could feel the tension building even in the air. It wasn't the kind of excitement that makes you cheer, and it was quieter, heavier, like the seconds before thunder. By July 19th, they'd reached lunar orbit. That meant the three of them were circling that big gray marble we'd stared at since childhood, just 3 dots of life in the middle of nothing. You'd think after the liftoff the hard part would be over, right? Wrong. The launch was the easy bit. Getting there was science. Coming back alive, That was faith, luck, and about 1,000,000 moving parts held together by duct tape and determination. It was a Saturday night when the broadcast came through that they'd be attempting the landing the next day. Mom made extra food, sandwiches, Jell-O the works, as if Neil Armstrong might stop by for a snack on his way down. Dad brought in the portable fan and positioned it just right so we could all think clearly, he said, which meant blow cigarette smoke directly at my face. We had the whole crew over again, the neighbors, Aunt Maggie with her tiny transistor radio, and my buddy Ronnie, who'd come by with a six-pack for morale. The TV flickered between shots of the astronauts in their suits and that grainy animation NASA used to explain the descent. It looked like a paper cutout gliding across a school project, but we ate it up like gospel. At one point, Walter Cronkite announced, "The Eagle will begin its powered descent in about an hour." You could feel the air tighten. Dad turned down the lights. Mom told everyone to hush. Even the cat stopped moving. The static crackled. Voices came through, calm, composed, but you could hear the weight behind every syllable. "Houston, this is Eagle. We're beginning powered descent." That was it. Every living room in America became mission control. You've never seen so many people talk to a television. Easy, easy. Watch the altitude. Come on, Neil, don't you dare sneeze. I don't know if anyone in that room breathed for the next few minutes. The voice from mission control kept reading numbers, fuel levels, velocities, in a monotone so steady it felt like it was holding back panic. Altitude 1,000 feet, 700, 400, somewhere. An alarm went off on their end. My mom gasped. "What's that mean?" Dad muttered, "It means we pray faster." They said they had 30 seconds of fuel left. 30 seconds, half a minute between history and tragedy. If you ever want to feel the longest 30 seconds of your life, try waiting for a man you've never met to land safely 238,000 miles away. The whole world was quiet, and then, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." You would have thought someone had just announced world peace. Our living room exploded. Mom clapped her hands to her mouth and cried. Dad actually laughed, this booming disbelief kind of laugh I'd never heard from him before. Ronnie high-fived me so hard I thought he broke my wrist. Even Mrs. Callahan dropped her Jell-O mold, and nobody cared. We just stood there, staring at that blurry image on the screen, the little white shape resting on a sea of gray. The first thing Dad said after catching his breath was, "Would you look at that? They actually did it." Then he sat down real quiet and whispered, "Good for them." I think we all felt it, that mix of pride and awe and something bigger. It wasn't just an American thing, it was human. We'd gone somewhere no one had ever gone, and not for conquest, not for gold, but just to see. Later that night, after everyone left, I went out to the backyard. The air was still thick, the crickets loud, the moon was full and bright, like it knew what had just happened. And for the first time in my life, I looked at it and didn't feel small. I felt connected. I thought about Michael Collins, still up there alone, orbiting while the others stood on the surface. Imagine that, flying in circles around the moon, knowing the world's eyes are elsewhere. He had one job, keep the home light burning. He once said, "I'm not lonely, I'm awed." That line stuck with me, still does. Because that's what it was, awe, not fear, not pride, just pure, quiet awe. The next morning before sunrise, the news said Armstrong and Aldrin were preparing to step out. Dad brewed coffee strong enough to keep a horse awake. Mom brought out blankets. It was one of those rare times when being tired didn't matter, when the whole country would have stayed up all week if it meant seeing what came next. I don't remember who said it first, but I think it was Walter Cronkite. "Ladies and gentlemen, man is about to set foot on the moon." That line rolled through the room like thunder through an open field. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, heartbeat loud in my ears. The grainy image flickered. You could see the shadow of the lunar module, the ladder, the ghostly glow of Armstrong's suit. The delay between voice and image made it even stranger, like watching through time itself. And then his boot hovered there, inches above the dust. That boot hovered there in silence, suspended halfway between two worlds, one we knew and one we'd only ever dreamed about. "Okay, Neil, you can start down now." Buzz's voice crackled through the speakers, and in that moment, you could have heard a pin drop in our living room if it weren't for the sound of our old Zenith humming like it was straining to keep up with history. The black and white image flickered, blurry, grainy, like a snowstorm caught in a flashlight. It didn't matter. That blur might as well have been magic. The camera tilted down just enough to show the ladder. You could see one gloved hand gripping the rail, the other steadying, and then slow as a prayer his foot came down. There was a pause, like even the moon wanted to hold its breath, and then that voice, calm but trembling under the weight of eternity. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The words echoed across 240,000 miles of space, through satellites, through antennas, through the cracked speakers of every radio and TV set on Earth, and somehow they landed right in our living room. I didn't even realize I'd stood up until my knees hit the coffee table. The whole room gasped as if we'd all just taken that step with him. Mom's hand flew to her chest. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered, tears already forming. Dad just stared, not blinking, not moving, like he was seeing something holy. And my little sister, she clapped once and shouted, "He did it!" before curling up on the couch, smiling like she'd just witnessed Santa himself. For about a minute, nobody spoke. We just listened to the sound of footsteps crunching softly on lunar dust. The static faded in and out like waves on some distant shore. Buzz joined him soon after, his voice all business, but his tone unmistakably human. "Beautiful, beautiful, magnificent desolation," he called it. Dad chuckled softly. Only an engineer could come up with poetry like that. We all laughed, and it felt good, because laughter's what you do when something's too big to handle any other way. The astronauts started describing what they saw. The horizon curving sharper than Earth's, the sunlight so bright it hurt to look at, the dust clinging to everything like velvet. I remember thinking, the moon wasn't silver or glowing or mystical. It was just rock, gray, empty, quiet, and somehow that made it more beautiful. Down here, the phones rang nonstop. Neighbors called neighbors. Church bells started ringing. Even though it was nearly midnight, somewhere down the street, someone set off fireworks, and you could hear people cheering from their porches like it was the 4th of July all over again. For 3 hours, the world was weightless. No war, no riots, no noise, just two tiny figures bouncing in slow motion under a black sky filled with stars that suddenly didn't feel so far away. I think what struck me most wasn't the step itself, and it was what happened after. You could hear Armstrong's breathing through the radio, steady, deliberate, the kind of breathing you do when you're trying not to cry. I'll tell you something, those men weren't just astronauts. They were mirrors. They reflected back everything we wanted to believe about ourselves. Courage, curiosity, decency, and hope. Even my dad, the old realist, broke character. He lit another cigarette, shook his head slowly, and said, "Well, I'll be damned. We actually did it." Then, without looking at anyone, he muttered, "Proud of 'em." That was as close as he ever got to a standing ovation. By the time they planted the flag, half the room was crying and the other half was pretending not to. The flag didn't wave, of course, no air up there. It just stood there, perfectly still, like the world's most patient symbol. Ronnie raised his beer in a toast. "To the crazy sons of guns who made it happen." And Dad, in his rare poetic moment, said, "To the ones who looked up and didn't stop." After that, everyone sort of fell silent again, not out of boredom, but reverence. Even through that fuzzy screen, you could feel the enormity of it, mankind leaving fingerprints on the heavens. Then came the phone call from President Nixon. You could hear the crackle as he said, "Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world." Dad rolled his eyes and said, "Now he wants credit," which made everyone laugh, breaking the tension just enough to breathe again. Outside, the night air felt strange, softer. I stepped onto the porch and looked up again. Same moon as always, but different now. You could almost imagine a faint glow where they stood, like a candle on a dark ocean. The neighbors were out too. You could see people on their lawns looking up, pointing, whispering. Someone said, "They're up there right now." And I swear for a heartbeat, we all felt closer to God. Back inside, Mom finally spoke. "I hope they come home safe," she said quietly. And that was the truth of it. For all the triumph, there was still that lingering fear. 3 men were still 250,000 miles away. The whole world had watched them touch down, but now we had to wait for them to come back. That was the part nobody talked about, coming home. It's one thing to reach the stars, it's another to find your way back through the dark. As the broadcast wound down and the astronauts climbed back inside, Walter Cronkite leaned back in his chair, eyes shining. "I think," he said, "we'll all remember this night as long as we live." He was right. I didn't just remember it, I lived by it. The morning after the landing, the world felt different, quieter somehow, like even the birds were still trying to process what had happened. I woke up late, which wasn't unusual for me in those days, but this time there was no rush. The TV was already on, volume low. showing replay after replay of the landing. Mom was sitting on the couch, still in her robe, coffee in hand, smiling like she'd dreamed it all. Dad was outside hosing down the driveway, pretending he wasn't sneaking glances at the sky every few minutes. The neighbors waved from across the street. Even old Mr. Patterson, who usually acted allergic to happiness, shouted, "Hell of a thing, wasn't it?" I shouted back, "Sure was," and he grinned like a man half his age. The radio was full of it, DJs stumbling over themselves, reporters choking up on air. One of them said, "For the first time in history, all of mankind shares the same sunrise." I don't know who that was, but I hope they got a raise. By the time Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins started the trip home, everyone in the country felt like they were part of the mission. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing someone talk about the re-entry. In diners, truck stops, beauty salons, everybody was suddenly an expert on heat shields and splashdown velocity. I remember this one guy at the gas station where I worked, a big fella truck driver, said, "If that capsule misses by even a mile, they're toast." Then he took a sip of his coffee and added, "But if they make it, I'm buying everyone here a beer." Well, they made it, and I'll tell you, I've never seen that man look so happy to keep a promise. On July 24th, the day of the splashdown, it felt like deja vu all over again. Everyone piled back into our living room. Same chairs, same coffee table, same Jell-O mold that no one ate last time, but Mrs. Callahan insisted on bringing again for tradition. The TV showed endless shots of the Pacific Ocean, endless blue, broken only by a tiny white speck floating on the waves. "Is that them?" Mom squinted. Dad chuckled. "That's the ocean, dear." She swatted his arm. "Don't sass me, Harold. I'm nervous." The tension built again the way it had during the landing. This strange blend of pride and fear, like we were all trying to will them home through sheer stubbornness. Then the announcer's voice broke through the static. "Parachutes deployed." 4 red and white canopies blossomed against the blue sky, drifting down like slow-motion fireworks. We all leaned forward, eyes wide. When that capsule hit the water and the announcer said splashdown confirmed, the room erupted again. Mom cried again. Dad actually whooped, a sound I hadn't heard from him since the Pirates won the World Series. The footage cut to Navy divers swimming toward the capsule, and I'll never forget that sight. Those bright orange suits bobbing in the water, the hatch opening, the first hand reaching out, 3 men, alive, tired, grinning, changed forever. It hit me then. We hadn't just watched a mission. We'd watched the impossible happen twice, once when they left and again when they came home. For days afterward, the whole country was walking taller. People held doors for each other. Strangers smiled on sidewalks. The papers called it the triumph of mankind, but to us, it just felt like the world had remembered how to be proud again. A few nights later, I was sitting out on the porch with Dad. He had the paper open to a photo of the astronauts in quarantine waving through the glass. "Look at that," he said. "They went all that way just to end up behind a window." He laughed quietly, then added, "Still, worth it." He folded the paper and stared off into the distance. "You know," he said after a while, "I didn't think I'd live to see something like that. We used to dream about flying higher than the clouds, never thought we'd actually touch the sky." I just nodded, because what do you say to that? I looked up at the moon again, same one I'd been staring at since I was a kid, and realized that from now on, whenever anyone looked at it, they'd have to say we've been there. That thought alone made me feel like the world had shifted. Like maybe we weren't as small as we'd always thought. Decades passed and the memory never dulled. Life went on, as it does. I got married, had kids, buried my folks, worked too many hours at too many jobs. The world changed. The TVs got smaller, then bigger, then somehow fit in our pockets. But I never forgot that night. And every time I looked up at the moon, whether from a back porch or a hospital, parking lot, or a quiet stretch of highway, I'd see that same dusty light and think, we did that. Funny thing, though, I used to think the magic was in the rocket or the astronauts or the science. Now I think it was in us, the people who believed it was possible. Because belief is what fuels every launch. It's what turns doubt into ignition. Last summer, my granddaughter came over for a school project about defining moments in history. She asked, "Grandpa, what was it like when they landed on the moon?" I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Sweetheart, it was the only time the whole world stopped fighting long enough to look in the same direction." She blinked like she didn't quite understand. And how could she? The world she knows moves too fast. But I told her the rest. About the launch, the living room, the pancakes, the laughter, the fear, the static, and that one perfect sentence that still gives me goosebumps 50 years later. She said, "That sounds beautiful." I said, "It was." She smiled. "You were lucky to see it." I laughed. "No, honey, we were lucky it happened." That night, after she went home, I sat on the porch again, same chair, same view, same moon. And I thought about all those who'd watched it with me back then. Mom with her hopeful eyes, Dad pretending not to care, my sister whispering to the TV. Most of them are gone now. But that memory, and it's like a star that never burns out. Sometimes I think about how we started that summer in 1969 with war, riots, and division, and somehow we ended it by walking on the moon. That's not just progress, that's poetry, the kind that sneaks up on you decades later and still makes you smile. So yeah, when people ask what it was like, I tell them it was loud, it was nerve-wracking, and it was beautiful. It made us proud to be human for a little while. And every time I tell it, I swear the moon shines a little brighter, like it's listening in, remembering too. So if you're still here listening to this old man ramble, take a second tonight to step outside, look up. You're not just seeing a rock in the sky, you're seeing a promise we kept. And if that story made you feel even a flicker of what we felt that night, then don't wander off just yet. Stick around. Because this porch still has stories to tell about the moments when the world stood still, when hope got loud, and when the impossible suddenly looked a lot like us. So go ahead, hit subscribe, and come back next time. We'll talk about the days when music changed the world, when cities danced in black and white, and when dreams were measured not in dollars, but in distance. Same porch, same chair. You bring the memories. I'll put the coffee on.